Are you actually kidding me? Really? This cannot be a serious request from McLaren. Because they want mercy from the FIA, and what's worse is that the FIA are hearing them out. Because of how fast back-to-back F1 weekends can roll by, news can travel quickly, and now Andrea Stella is claiming that the FIA is considering softer penalties for accidental breaches of the very rule that disqualified both McLaren drivers in Las Vegas, and maybe almost got them disqualified in Brazil. Now, without proper context, you might be wondering, look, what's the problem here? That doesn't sound too bad, you know, sometimes people do this accidentally. Well, no, not this rule, my old laddery-do. Because when you step back and realise the context as to why that plank, which wore too much, was actually even installed there in the first place, you might begin to understand why that many people, and I've seen this on social media, have gotten absolutely enraged by this. That maybe this is an insult to the legacy of Ayrton Senna and the nature of his passing. I get that this is a championship to play for, and it's taken a major blow in that Max Verstappen is seriously gaining more momentum, and the tide of public opinion is very much against the Woking-based team. But this is the sort of thing that really cannot or should not be touched. Much like how Charles and Lewis had to stomach it back in Austin 2023. The teams didn't like it. No, they don't have to like it, but they had to lump it. So here is what Andrea Stella had to say for your consideration, and you can understand why this sounds really... Anyway, just listen. Ahem. We verified together with the technical delegate that the measurement of the skid thickness was correct. Even if the excessive wear is relatively minor in only one location, the regulation is very clear that the rear skids need to be at least 9mm at the end of the race in every location. Unlike sporting or financial rules, there is no proportionality in the application of penalties for technical regulation infringements. The FIA itself has admitted that this lack of proportionality should be addressed in the future to ensure that minor and accidental technical infringements with minimal or no performance benefits do not lead to disproportionate consequences. It should also be remembered that the FIA itself emphasized that the infringement was not intentional. There was no deliberate attempt to circumvent the regulations, and there are also mitigating circumstances, as we explained to the event stewards. Now, this is just going to open up yet another avenue which has been relatively closed off and simplified. You go over, you're out. There you go. If you're under, you're good. And it tells me that McLaren, even though they accept the rules, they are very much upset about this, that they lost a total of 37 points. Yeah, the constructors is all wrapped up and all, but can you imagine a scenario if it hadn't been, and then it was all to play for? Well, I think this result certainly now means they are not going to have double of the amount of points whoever is in second place, currently Mercedes. They can't brag about that. Nor can they say that either one of their drivers managed to win the constructors by themselves. Instead, McLaren are choosing to just not let it go, and are actively lobbying for change in how technical penalties work, using their regained heft as back-to-back constructors champions as a persuasion tactic, probably. And it makes me think that if McLaren actually succeeds and gets technical penalties softened, or you have a sliding scale of penalties that are afforded to them, then this is just going to open up so much debate and controversy. It's going to waste so much time, and you could argue that the FIA's own principles regarding safety-related matters, which is why the plank is there in the first place, have been compromised, and that they can be manipulated. Yes, it's not as sexy as Abu Dhabi 2021, where it was plain to see in front of us. This is very much behind the scenes and very nerdy and technical. Because when Stella points out that the rules are very clear, but then immediately pivots to a lack of proportionality in minor and accidental infringements, he's basically laying out a case for a future rule where this sort of breach doesn't result in an automatic disqualification. That breaches of the future may come with a swathe of penalties, which may be peak at disqualification, but are rarely enforced. You might have something as low as a simple fine, perhaps. Nothing that would impact the championship too much. And this is just making me think, and getting the foam of doubt out for this particular bit, that this isn't McLaren thinking about everyone else, or the technical teams, or trying to show other teams some sense of mercy and that they're fighting for them for some sort of justice, or leniency. This is very much no. McLaren just swinging their political heft around all over the place. And quite frankly, I don't like that, and it's making me look at this bobble hatter bias I've had since the channel began and just go, do I really want to wear this? And it's quite a convenient time to say all of this too, right before Qatar, when the F1 social media feeds are all talking about Lando is this close toward destiny. And McLaren additionally bringing out that there is no reason to favour Norris over Piastri at the moment, and that Piastri says, well, we talked about doing team orders, but I flatly said no. I'm quite certain he said something before the no, something a little bit more colourful, but he just chose not to say it, because he's a good boy like that. But all of this is a very neat little distraction tactic because it's so emotionally charged right now that you can say something so technical that it just slips people by. Well, it didn't slip by this ladder, man. But seriously, why push for this? In the short term, the motive is brutally obvious. Points lost right in the middle of a title fight where Max has closed on previous championship leader Oscar Piastri by a total of 104 points since we returned to Zandvoort. That kind of fight back is crazy, even if Max doesn't convert. And it really doesn't help that he's basically shouting to anyone who will listen that he is in a position right now that is only due to the failures of their rivals. And Red Bull bringing out the mind games. Oh man. But seriously, he and Red Bull should really be proud of this surge since the end of the summer break, that they've actually been able to regroup so quickly in the matter of just a couple of months. This is remarkable. This is almost as big a turnaround as McLaren from the beginning of 2023 to Silverstone that year. And if you're McLaren management and you're looking at that massive uptick in pace, you're just thinking, we've just got to do whatever we can, that these kind of marginal issues are no longer a problem ever again in our history. Because again, a double disqualification, this is the first time it's happened in their entire history, and it happened under Zach Brown and Andrea Stella's watch. And then the longer term, maybe they're trying to seek out something that all teams hate. Just the finality, the binary system of technical breaches. Unlike the other sporting regulations, which Stella mentioned, they do come with some caveats and further context. But when it comes to these kind of matters, especially regarding the plank, the car is either legal or it's not, regardless of whether they meant to or not, bad luck or otherwise. Just ask George Russell after he lost his win around Spa through no fault of his own due to a technical breach after such a remarkable defense against Lewis Hamilton with fresher tyres. It was amazing, and it hurt, but it's something that's called motor racing. And these technical lines in the sand are not here to be mean or draconian or trying to sway the championship. No, they have been in place, these particular rules, for 30 years. It's all in the interest of safety. And the FIA, especially in the last several decades, has taken safety very, very seriously. This is not the days when, if you mention safety back in the 1970s, say, around the peak of Jackie Stewart's powers, you'd be saying, you're a pansy, you're not a real man driving cars, death, oh, bring it! Or at least you had to keep a brave face. No, safety very much is paramount, thanks to heroes like Sid Watkins, Max Mosley. In that particular context, everything else is a little bit woo. And then, of course, bastions like Jackie Stewart, and of course, Senna himself. And if McLaren succeeds and gets the FIA to suddenly go against their principles that have been in place since the Senna death, then it's just going to make incidents like Vegas survivable rather than catastrophic. And it just means that it becomes more of an inconvenience, especially for the front-running teams. Well, if they just break it by a few micrometers, oh, it's a fine. Oh, okay, I think we can stomach that. We make millions per year. Oh, a 10-second grid drop? Shoot. Well, we don't score as many points, but at least we're still in it. And then we really have to dig into the whole Senna thing, because again, this is just making me question why I even have this thing in the first place. Because the thing they're trying to meddle with, and something that caused them to be disqualified, is that plank, which is now very much a very taboo topic. After 1994, when Senna and Roland Ratzenberger lost their lives, the FIA added the wooden skid block as a hard way to enforce minimum ride height and curved cornering speeds, as well as many other means in trying to slow cars down. And specifically, the plank is there to stop the car from bottoming out completely. That was there as a deterrent to stop teams just putting their cars so low to the ground where you could run the risk of bottoming out and having a similar accident ever again. You'd have to have precautions. And the FIA, they didn't care if you lost performance. The whole point was to slow the cars down to make it more manageable. So that means they can then add further safety measures later. Unfortunately, one of those symptoms were those really ridiculously high shoulder covers in 1996. That was not aesthetically pleasing. And because of the two people whose lives were sadly taken due to the relative nature of all of this, is that it's now become hallowed ground, is that this is absolutely religious territory for many fans across the world, and you do not touch it. It is basically become heresy if you dare tamper with anything surrounding the plank. Which is why we're never going to get the whole idea of teams being able to freely change tyres under red flags, that being a free pit stop. It's there to prevent potentially damaged tyres due to potential debris on the track. Fresh rubber from the blankets, that'll be much safer. It's impossible to try and argue the FIA on that, and that should be the case with the plank. That and this should be there to stay. And the severity of this nature, either you're fine or you're not, it's either to keep things safe or to say to the engineers, well, if you want to make the cars faster and grippier, you've got to find other conventional ways and safer ways in which to do so. Ideally, on the bodywork, which is not particularly ridiculous like the X-Wings of 1998. So if the ultimate sanction is your car is going to be thrown out, then you understandably put in some kind of a safety margin. And sometimes teams and drivers don't know what's going to be happening on the track. Things can change, conditions can change. What you thought might work might end up actually causing the car to wear out its plank too much. So you really have to have some sense of contingency. Yeah, you can run the car low, but are you brave enough, chum? And especially around the track like Las Vegas, because it's all on the streets, it's all on the roads, and there are so many manhole covers around, we're all just thinking, okay, which one's going to go up and bust a car this time? And speaking of the street, it's all about being a brick wall, these regulations. There is no ways of going around it. So when you look back to the 2023 disqualification of Hamilton and Leclerc for plank wear, the explanation was the same basic story. Around Qatar, which is fun but bumpy, where they have to shave the bumps all the time, therefore there's limited data, there's also the fact that it's a sprint weekend, they just misjudged on how much wear the plank could suffer through. The FIA checked the thickness and that was that. There was plenty of frustration from Mercedes and Ferrari, but they accepted the rule was black and white, it is what it is, they messed up. And they would make sure that it just would not happen again. Well, I mean, for Ferrari, it happened almost 18 months later. You can show all the porpoising traces that you want, you can prove that you didn't mean to, but if your car ultimately is deemed illegal, that's it. That's what it is. You just didn't take safety into consideration. And nobody before got really far suggesting that maybe the penalties should be reduced a little bit. People were just like, oh, tough luck, buddy. You know, it's just what it is. You know, it's there for a reason. It's all about safety. Just make sure it doesn't happen again, okay? But now we're at the point of when McLaren got caught in Vegas and suddenly we're hearing about proportionality and how the consequences were disproportionate for such small deviations, and that something should be done to lessen the blow. And the context of their own analysis actually makes this more irritating, not less, because according to the race, McLaren's own review showed the Vegas bumps triggered heavy porpoising, which chewed through the rear plank. They saw the wear building mid-race and even told Norris to lift and coast. By the way, for those of you wondering why Oscar was not informed about this as much, well, it might have been down, well, as McLaren claim, due to a faulty sensor, not a broken sensor even, which is why they didn't get as much data, and therefore they couldn't produce as much of a conclusion in telling Piastri to lift his coast as much as Lando had to. So this isn't something that just came up after the race, when McLaren were completely bamboozled and shocked and were like, we didn't see this happen, what's going on here? No, this isn't some kind of invisible gremlin. They knew about this because we saw Lando drop off so much behind Verstappen. We thought it was about preserving fuel, to have a fuel sample ready in case they got a technical breach for that regulation, because you can get disqualified for that too. They knew the risks, they gambled that their margin might have been enough, or their precautionary tactic of slowing down might have been enough to save them, but it just wasn't, they lost. And also you got to remember that every other team suffered the same situation as them. It's not like some kind of isolated incident or something like that. All the teams had to put up with this, and you don't hear any other team suffering through all of this or them getting thrown out for the same violation. All the top 10 cars were evaluated for this, and no one else got caught out bar the two McLarens. So when you get Stella insisting that this was not an unreasonable chase of performance, it feels like they're just trying to soften the blow and just make it out to be some kind of an oopsie. They were chasing performance because they suddenly were a lot better than they had been the last 2 years around here. Them really suffering due to the fact the car just can't switch the tyres on as well. They rolled the dice, and they got snake eyes. I may as well use a Vegas pun one more time, honestly. And on top of all of that, McLaren is basically pointing to the FIA and saying, you've got a systemic problem there, chum. Something is wrong with your system, and we've got the means and the drive in which to help you change that. And if what he's saying is accurate, and the FIA is actually entertaining the idea and considering all of these options instead of just simply swatting them away and we never heard hide nor hair about it again, then this is a really slippery slope, folks. This is really, really dangerous. And where this could go, one little movement, then another little movement, then another, then another, then another, and then it just all snowballs, and then we get another big accident. And technical rules like this exist because you can't police intent. You can say it was an accident, but how do you prove it was an accident? Especially when McLaren knows that, disappearing WhatsApp messages exist. The moment you say, we'll only disqualify you if you meant it or you gained enough, you open the floodgates for everyone else. Every protest becomes a courtroom drama about simulations and microns of wear. The rule right now is binary, and that simplicity keeps the sport sane and the FIA from having another aneurysm. If you suddenly make it a much greyer area, you are going to have longer hearings, and results being delayed longer and longer and longer is either going to overextend the tension to the point it becomes exhausting and then you don't care anymore, and then Liberty Media gets upset that no one's hyped up about the situation, or you're just going to provide a situation where, well, where do you stop? You're going to get all of these situations where people are bringing in spreadsheets and charts about limiting and wear and how much they exactly wore. Then there's going to be various other bits and pieces. There's more investment, there's underinvestment and tension. This is not racing. There should be just a clear line in the sand. There really should be. And you sort of saw this for yourself, because apparently McLaren's plea to the steward took around about 2 hours. That's why we first heard about the ping for the summon to the stewards, and then the result came a little bit later. Whereas Ferrari's around China, that took around, I think, half an hour or something. It was fairly clear cut. And all of this is just making me imagine a system where, with the plank, there is some kind of tiered system. If you have wear up to 0.2 millimeters, it's some kind of small fine or a time penalty. If you wear about by 0.5 millimeter, it's a bigger time penalty, like maybe 30 seconds or a grid drop for the next race. And only above that could disqualification be above the table, when you could just prove without a shadow of a doubt that, yeah, that much wear, yeah, you were definitely trying to gain. And then you got to remember that only half the grid were checked around Vegas, not all of them, or just a slightly bigger number of them. Well, how often do the FIA check the plank? They may not check it around here, and, you know, if we're only just a little bit over, we'll just get a fine, or like 5 seconds, and over the course of a race, what is 5 seconds really? So can we maybe take a gamble of running it lower, or finding something that maybe pushes the boundaries? It gets people asking questions, and questions that could compromise safety. This is just going to make the entire system look even more fragile. But if the worst case scenario really becomes a 10 to 30 second penalty, you're going to get some kind of initiative from bright sparks within the aero department in finding out some kind of a solution, which really skirt the balance regarding safety and performance, and they're just thinking, teams, oh, we'll stomach that, we'll take that. And that's what I'm trying to get at here, folks. It's not about McLaren's Vegas result, but about trying to change a safety-based rule from being a hard stop to something teams can nibble at or argue toward, that, yeah, it was an accident, mate, honest. There's also the symbolism, which is why and many others are quite emotionally charged by this. The plank came off of the back of F1's darkest weekend, as well as other measures to reduce downforce and speeds. And thankfully, because of all of this, we didn't suffer a death, Formula One fans and the sport itself, for 2 decades. One change being that you had better not dare run that car too low. It's baked into the sport's collective memory and legacy, as part of the price paid to keep the cars from becoming death traps in high-speed corners. And I have seen some people in the comments say, well, yeah, the plank is outdated, cars are much safer now. Yes, I do hear you. Cars are a lot more structurally sound. There are side impact and front impact crash tests, which is another legacy that came from the 1994 disaster. But that doesn't necessarily mean that drivers are immune from injury, because if you're going to go off at a track with your car bottoming out at 180 miles an hour, you are still going to feel that. You are still going to be having some kind of injury or some kind of concussion. Do drivers really want to run the risk of that happening? Can the teams and their legal departments stomach the lawsuits and the insurance claims? No. Would Liberty Media want to suffer the backlash of putting their drivers in danger because they took out that kind of system, the plank? No, they don't want to. They really don't want to. Why would they put themselves through all of that risk and precarious nature just for the sake of entertainment or speed? It just feels morally wrong that the FIA is even considering just watering down these regulations in the future, just because McLaren told them to. Because this isn't some kind of little thing, a cheeky thing like paint thickness or a strategically placed bit of sticky tape. But seriously, the gamesmanship of McLaren at the moment, it's really plain to see. Publicly, Stella has apologised to the drivers and fans and said the team is disappointed, they've taken it on the chin, supposedly, for not giving the drivers a legal car. They look magnanimous in defeat to some. But at the same time, They are loudly presenting the outcome as an example of a broken penalty framework and saying the FIA feels their pain, but that their hands are tied thanks to those pesky restrictions. It really feels like they're trying to have it both ways. They're cop in front of the cameras, and they have the whole papaya rules thing and Max Verstappen to distract many of the populace, but at the same time, they're quietly trying to spark technical change in terms of the regulations, in that if this were to happen again and they flew too close to the sun, they would get a very relatively small slap on the wrist, instead of being completely ejected. Because again, I don't think McLaren expected the amount of jubilation and celebration of having two of their cars being taken out of the classification. That must have been to the PR team an absolute shocker. People really don't like us? Wow. Well, I mean, past examples could maybe have given them a hint, but I think probably this was a major blow in how McLaren wanted to be perceived. And this is just for the sake of having the rulebook look kinder for you and your peers. And this is just now screaming to me what the Christian Horner era of Red Bull were trying to do. They'd be lodging protests, seeking mercy from the FIA, all of these kind of things to make things a little bit easier. So that means they can then maybe figure out more innovations that might best suit them performance-wise, or to make sure they don't get punished as much in the future. And it's just making me think, this is just so rich of McLaren to be saying this, because the last few years they've been trying to paint that they're the fair team, they're the clean team, they're the sensible team. They wouldn't do things like this in trying to change the rules to make it actually better suit them in the future. Yeah, McLaren, you've changed, man. You used to be cool. McLaren, you should just swallow this bitter pill and just get on with it, and make sure either one of your driver actually converts and stop Max Verstappen in his tracks, instead of trying to tamper a rule which is rooted in legacy and safety. Regarding proportionality, as Stella says, there is room to talk about that in various aspects of the sport, but when it comes to technical ones, no. It should be, as Martin Brundle would say, a slam dunk. It was put in place to ensure that more often than not, drivers would actually walk away or at least remain alive. And if the FIA wanted to try and tweak something regarding this, it would be a lot healthier to look at maybe better sampling of cars or more consistent scrutineering that the drivers are trying to seek. Maybe even rethinking plank material or where they actually measure them. The part that should not move is the idea that if your skid block is under the minimum, the car is illegal and the result is thrown out the window. Every time a team complains it's too harsh, they're really saying the price of safety has become inconvenient. And as soon as it becomes a bargaining opportunity for the teams around skid block wear, then I think a very important part of the sport's history and its integrity has been lost or compromised or worse. It just leaves me feeling really disappointed and quite frankly a little bit angry. And clearly, based on my initial tweet when I first heard the news, 1,700 plus likes, yeah, I think you feel a little bit aggrieved too. But something that might be a little bit less egregious or enraging is this video right here. In fact, I think you'll actually really enjoy it. See you over there.